The village of Black Hollow had always been a place of quiet unease. Nestled in a valley surrounded by dense forests and jagged mountains, it was a place where the wind carried whispers and the shadows seemed to linger too long. The villagers were a superstitious lot, and for good reason. Strange things happened here, things that couldn't be explained by logic or reason. I was born here, as were my parents and their parents before them. My name is Elara Vey, and I am the village healer. It's a role that has been passed down through generations of my family, along with a deep, unspoken understanding of the dangers that lurk in the woods. The first sign that something was wrong came on a cold, moonless night. Old Man Hargrove, the village trapper, had gone missing. At first, we thought he had simply gotten lost in the woods. But when a search party found his traps twisted and broken, 5 and high, as if crushed by some immense force, we knew something was terribly wrong. Then came the dreams. It started with me. I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. In my dreams, I was standing in the circle of standing stones, the air thick with the scent of decay. The creatures were there, their forms shifting and writhing, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. They called to me, their voices echoing in my mind, urging me to step through the veil. At first, I tried to dismiss the dreams as nothing more than the product of an overactive imagination. But then others began to report similar experiences. Marin, the miller's wife, dreamed of a forest where the trees bled sap like blood. Tomas, the blacksmith, saw a creature with too many eyes and a mouth full of jagged teeth. Even the children began to whisper of shadows that moved on their own. The village was on edge, and I knew it was only a matter of time before something terrible happened. The standing stones had always been a place of mystery. They stood in a perfect circle at the edge of the forest, their surfaces etched with symbols that no one could decipher. The villagers avoided them, believing them to be cursed. But I had always been drawn to them ever since I was a child. The first time I saw the thin place, I was 7 years old. I had wandered too far into the woods, lured by a strange hum that seemed to emanate from the stones. As I approached, the air grew colder and the hum grew louder, vibrating in my chest like the toll of a distant bell. That's when I saw it, a shimmering veil like heat rising off the ground, but vertical, slicing through the air between 2 of the stones. Beyond it, the forest looked different. The trees were twisted, their branches clawing at a sky that was too dark, too close. And then I saw them. Figures moved in the shadows, their shapes shifting and writhing as if they were made of smoke. One turned toward me, and I saw its face a grotesque mockery of a human, with too many eyes and a mouth that stretched too wide. It reached for me, its fingers elongating like tendrils, and I screamed. I didn't tell anyone what I had seen. Not then. But now, as the dreams grew more frequent and the disappearances continued, I knew I had to confront the truth. I called a meeting in the village square, urging everyone to attend. The air was thick with tension as the villagers gathered, their faces pale with fear. I stood on the steps of the old chapel, my heart pounding in my chest. We can't ignore this any longer, I said, my voice trembling but firm. The thin places are opening and the creatures from the other side are slipping through. We need to find a way to protect ourselves. The villagers murmured among themselves, their voices filled with fear and uncertainty. Then Thomas stepped forward, his face set in a grim expression. What do you suggest we do, Elara? He asked. We're just farmers and craftsmen. We don't know how to fight something like this. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. We start by learning, I said. We need to understand what we're dealing with. And we need to find a way to close the thin places before it's too late. There was a long silence as the villagers considered my words. Then Marin stepped forward, her face pale but determined. I'll help, she said, whatever it takes. One by one, the others agreed, their voices growing stronger as they found courage in each other's resolve. We were a small, frightened group, but we were all we had. That night, we gathered at the standing stones, our footsteps heavy with dread. The air was cold, and the hum was louder than ever, vibrating in our chests like the toll of a distant bell. The stones seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly light, and the veil between worlds shimmered like a mirage. I stepped into the circle, my heart pounding in my chest. The others followed, their faces pale with fear. We had brought with us the relics of our ancestors' ancient tools and talismans that had been passed down through generations. I held the silver dagger in my hand, its blade glowing with a faint otherworldly light. "We need to perform the ritual," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "It's the only way to close the thin places." The villagers nodded, their faces set in grim determination. We formed a circle around the stones, our hands joined, and began to chant the words of the ritual. The air grew colder and the hum grew louder, vibrating in our chests like the toll of a distant bell. And then it happened. The veil between worlds shimmered and split, revealing the twisted forest beyond. The creatures were there, their forms shifting and writhing, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. They reached for us, their fingers elongating like tendrils, and we screamed, but we didn't stop chanting. We couldn't. The ritual was our only hope. The creatures were relentless, their forms shifting and writhing as they tried to break through the veil. But we held our ground, our voices growing stronger as we chanted the words of the ritual. And then I sought a way to close the thin places for good. It was a terrible choice, but it was the only one we had. I stepped forward, the silver dagger in my hand, and plunged it into my own chest. The villagers screamed, their voices fading into the distance as the thin places closed, severing the ties between worlds. The creatures were gone, their forms dissolving into nothingness, and the air grew still. I woke in my cottage, the dagger clutched in my hand. The villagers were gathered around me, their faces pale with shock and relief. The thin places were closed, and the creatures were gone. But I knew it wasn't over. The thin places would always be there, waiting for the right moment to open again. And the creatures would be waiting too, their hunger for our world never satisfied. I am Elara Vey, the healer of Black Hollow, and I will be ready. The days that followed were a blur. The villagers were shaken, but they were also relieved. The thin places were closed, and the creatures were gone. But I knew it wasn't over. The creatures had been banished, but they were not defeated. They would return, and when they did, we needed to be ready. I spent my days studying the ancient texts, searching for any information that could help us. The villagers helped where they could, bringing me food and supplies, but for the most part I was alone. And then, one night I had another dream. I was standing in the circle of stones, the air thick with the scent of decay. The creatures were there, their forms shifting and writhing, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. They called to me, their voices echoing in my mind, urging me to step through the veil, but this time I didn't wake up. I found myself in the other world, the twisted forest stretching out before me. The sky was a sickly green, the ground covered in a thick black mist that clung to my legs like tar. The trees were twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. And the creatures. They were everywhere, their forms shifting and writhing, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. One of them turned toward me, its mouth stretching into a grotesque smile. "Elara," it said, its voice a guttural rasp. "You've come at last." I wanted to run, to scream, but I forced myself to stand my ground. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The creature tilted its head, its eyes narrowing. "We want what we have always wanted," it said. "Your fear. Your worship, your world." "You can't have it," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. The creature laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You cannot stop. Youth's little healer. The thin places are opening, and soon we will cross over. Your world will be ours." I woke with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. The villagers were gathered around me, their faces pale with fear. "What happened?" Marin asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had seen. The creatures were planning to cross over, to invade our world. And they were using the thin places to do it. I spent the next few days poring over the ancient texts, searching for any information that could help us. And then I found it a prophecy, written in a language so old that even I could barely decipher it. When the veil grows thin and the gods awaken, the healer must rise. With blood and sacrifice, the thin places shall close, but the cost will be great. The words sent a chill down my spine. The prophecy was clear. I was the healer, and it was my duty to close the thin places. But the cost. I didn't want to think about what that might mean. The final confrontation came on. Night, when the moon was full and the air was thick with the scent of decay. The villagers had gathered in the square, their faces pale with fear. As the creatures emerged from the forest, their forms shifting and writhing in the moonlight. I stood at the center of the square, my heart pounding in my chest. The creatures surrounded me, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. One of them stepped forward, its mouth stretching into a grotesque smile. "Elara," it said, its voice a guttural rasp. "It is time." I felt a strange pull, as if the creatures were drawing me into their world. But I resisted, forcing myself to stand my ground. "No," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I will not be your vessel." The creature tilted its head, its eyes narrowing. "You have no choice, little healer. The thin places are open and your world is ours." "Not yet," I said, and I reached into my pocket, pulling out the silver dagger. It was an ancient relic, passed down through generations of my family, and it was said to have the power to sever the ties between worlds. The creature hissed, its form shifting and writhing as it lunged at me. But I was faster. I plunged the dagger into its chest, and it let out a guttural scream, its body dissolving into black mist. The other creatures recoiled, their forms flickering like shadows in the light. I turned to the villagers, my voice ringing out in the night. "Now, close the thin places." The villagers surged forward, their weapons raised as I led them to the standing stones. The creatures tried to stop us, but we fought them off, our fear giving way to determination. When we reached the circle, I placed the dagger in the center, its blade glowing with a faint, otherworldly light. "Close," I whispered, and the stones began to tremble, their surfaces glowing with a blinding light. The creatures screamed, their forms dissolving into black mist as the thin places began to close. But it wasn't enough. The creatures were too powerful, their hold on our world too strong. I knew what I had to do. I stepped into the circle, the dagger in my hand, and plunged it into my own chest. The last thing I remember is the sound of the villagers screaming, their voices fading into the distance as the thin places closed, severing the ties between worlds. The creatures were gone, their forms dissolving into nothingness, and the air grew still. I woke in my cottage, the dagger clutched in my hand. The villagers were gathered around me, their faces pale with shock and relief. The thin places were closed, and the creatures were gone. But I knew it wasn't over. The thin places would always be there, waiting for the right moment to open again. And the creatures would be waiting too, their hunger for our world never satisfied. I am Elara Vey, the healer of Black Hollow, and I will be ready. The village of Black Hollow has returned to its quiet, uneasy peace. The thin places are closed, and the creatures are gone for now. But I know they will return. They always do. I spend my days studying the ancient text, searching for any information that could help us. The villagers help where they can, bringing me food and supplies. But for the most part, I am alone. And then, one night, I have another dream. I am standing in the circle of stones, the air thick with the scent of decay. The creatures are there, their forms shifting and writhing, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. They call to me, their voices echoing in my mind, urging